And yet what they built was extraordinary. We are talking about stone circles that track the movement of the moon with such precision that they capture events that only occur once every 18.5 years. We are talking about chambered tombs oriented so precisely to the winter solstice sunrise that a narrow beam of light travels more than 19 meters into their darkest interior on exactly one morning per year. We are talking about desert arrangements of stone that pointed towards specific stars as they rose above the horizon 6,000 years ago, when the skies above the Sahara were still full of rain and green grass. We are talking about great pyramid complexes whose internal shafts aimed at individual stars like telescopes carved from limestone. Medicine wheels on the wind-swept plains of North America. Stone temples in Malta that caught the light of the equinox in a golden dagger of sunrise. Rows and rows of standing stones stretching for miles across the French countryside, organized with a geometric logic that still challenges researchers today. Whoever these people were, wherever they lived, whatever language they spoke, they shared one universal impulse. They looked up. And then, with enormous effort and extraordinary intelligence, they used the earth itself to remember what they saw. So come, settle in, let the night grow quiet around you. We are going to follow the stars backward through time and visit the places where stone and sky meet, and try, gently and humbly, to understand what those first astronomers were looking for, and what perhaps they found.
One thing worth carrying with you through this journey is a sense of how truly ancient these places are. When we say 5,000 years, the number is correct, but the feeling of it is almost impossible to hold. 5,000 years ago, the great civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia were only just beginning to coalesce. The Bronze Age had not yet come to Europe. The Roman Empire was 4,000 years in the future. Shakespeare was 4,500 years in the future. The entire span of recorded human history, everything we have written down and remembered, is roughly 5,000 years long. And some of these monuments were already ancient by the time the first words were carved into clay. To feel the weight of that, stand at Stonehenge and realize that it was already 2,000 years old when Julius Caesar was born. Or consider Göbekli Tepe, which was already buried and forgotten before the Great Pyramid of Giza was built. These are not old things in the way that a Victorian building is old. They are old in a different category entirely, a category that begins to approach the geological, the deep time of the earth itself. And yet they are human. They were built by hands not unlike ours, by minds that worked in patterns we can recognize, motivated by questions we still ask. Where are we in the year? Where are we in the cosmos? What does the sky mean? What should we do? And when? These are the questions the stones were built to answer, and in their patient, enduring silence, they are still answering.
Before we begin this long, slow journey, if these calm, unhurried walks through history help you drift off to sleep, I would truly love it if you hit the like button and subscribed to this channel. My name is Heo, and I run Boring History for Sleep, and right now I am trying to reach 1,000 subscribers, which would mean the world to me. If you enjoy what we do here, please like this video. Leave a comment telling me where you are listening from, and if you have any sleepy hype left in you, send it my way. Every single subscriber and every single comment genuinely helps this little channel grow. Now, let us return to the stones. Construction of the monument began somewhere around 5,000 years ago, roughly 3000 BC, though its history is complex and layered. The site was not built all at once, but rather developed in multiple phases across many centuries, with different groups of people adding, rearranging, and rebuilding over a span of roughly 1,500 years. The earliest phase involved the construction of a circular earthwork, a ditch and bank arrangement, along with the placement of a series of pits around the inside of the circle, known today as the Aubrey holes. These holes, 56 in total and evenly spaced, are now thought by some researchers to have had an astronomical function related to the prediction of lunar eclipses, though this interpretation remains debated. What is not debated, and what draws tens of thousands of people to Wiltshire every summer solstice morning, is the solar alignment. Stand in the centre of Stonehenge on the morning of the summer solstice, and you will watch the sun rise directly above the heel-stone, a single large rough stone standing just outside the main circle to the northeast. The first rays of that midsummer sun travel between the stones and strike the centre of the monument with a kind of purposeful precision that is difficult to dismiss as coincidence. The monument is oriented so that this alignment is exact, the northeast-facing opening in the earthwork, the avenue that leads toward the heel-stone, the arrangement of the great trilithons within, all of it arranged with the summer sunrise in mind. But that is only the beginning. The winter solstice is equally encoded in the structure, and some researchers argue it was actually the more important of the two alignments. Stand at the center of Stonehenge in the late afternoon of the winter solstice and look towards the southwest. The sun will set perfectly framed between the great stones of the tallest trilithon, that towering central pair of uprights with their massive lintel, dropping in a blaze of amber and copper light directly along the monument's axis. The altar stone, a large flat slab now lying within the circle, aligns with this winter sunset in a way that suggests it was intended as a focal point for exactly that moment. Then there are the station stones. Of the original 4 station stones that once stood within the earthwork circle, 2 survive. These 4 stones formed a rectangle, and when you map that rectangle onto the sky, something remarkable becomes apparent. 2 of the sides of that rectangle align with the summer solstice sunrise and winter solstice sunset axis. The other 2 sides align with the northernmost and southernmost rising and setting points of the moon, an event that only occurs at what astronomers call the major lunar standstill, which happens once every 18.6 years. Think about that for a moment. The people who laid out Stonehenge encoded into its geometry not just the annual cycle of the sun, but the much longer, much subtler cycle of the moon's wandering against the sky. To notice a lunar standstill, to understand it as a cycle and not a random occurrence, and then to build a permanent record of that cycle into the proportions of a stone monument, you need generations of careful, systematic skywatching. You need people handing down precise observations across decades, across centuries, trusting the next generation to carry the knowledge forward. The blue stones, those smaller stones that form an inner circle, are perhaps the most astonishing element of the site, not for their astronomical significance, but for the pure, staggering effort of their procurement. They came from the Preseli Hills in Wales, roughly 250 miles away. Each stone weighs between 2 and 5 tons. Moving them to Salisbury Plain, whether by sea, river and land, or purely overland, was an act of collective determination so vast in scale that it signals more than almost anything else just how important this place and its sky-watching function was to the people who built it. Stonehenge did not just record the sky, it participated in it. It was a place where the motion of the heavens could be tracked, predicted, and in some sense made tangible, made real in the world of stone and earth. It stood at the intersection of the human and the cosmic.
Consider for a moment the extraordinary cognitive achievement that Stonehenge represents, quite apart from its engineering. The people who designed it had to understand that the sun rises at different points on the horizon at different times of year. They had to understand that this variation follows a regular cycle. They had to understand that the extreme positions, the northernmost rise of midsummer and the southernmost rise of midwinter, are fixed and predictable. They had to translate that understanding into an orientation that would allow a future observer to use the monument as an instrument. All of this without paper, without instruments, without accumulated written science to draw on. They did it through observation. Years and years and years of standing on that hill, or wherever they stood before the monument existed, watching where the sun rose, marking the position with a post or a stone, returning the next morning and the morning after that, accumulating knowledge that was passed down from grandmother to grandchild, from shaman to apprentice, from one generation to the next, across spans of time we can barely imagine. The sarsen stones themselves, those massive grey blocks that form the outer circle and the horseshoe of trilithons at the centre, came from Marlborough Downs, about 25 miles north of Stonehenge. Each of the largest uprights weighs around 25 tons. There are 80 of them in the complete monument. They were quarried, shaped to a consistent size, dragged or sledged across the rolling chalk downland of Wiltshire, and erected with remarkable precision, the lintels on the outer circle mortised and tenoned to their uprights with carved joints that locked them in place. This is not primitive work. This is the product of advanced craftsmanship and sophisticated planning.
Newgrange. Built around 3200 BC, roughly 5,200 years before tonight, Newgrange is a passage tomb, a great circular mound of earth and stone, nearly 85 meters across and 13 meters high, faced with white quartz along its front wall in a manner that, when newly built, would have made it shine like a beacon for miles across the Boyne Valley. It was the work of an agricultural community, Neolithic farmers who had settled into this landscape and who clearly had sophisticated beliefs about death, the afterlife, and the movement of the heavens. The entrance to Newgrange faces southeast. A long stone-lined passage, 19 meters long, leads through the mound to a cruciform chamber at its center, where 3 recesses surround a corbelled stone ceiling that arcs above you in a beehive shape, still perfectly watertight after 5,000 years. In those 3 recesses, the bones of the dead were placed. This was a house not just for the dead, but for something more specific, more own encrypted record of what those ancient people saw when they looked up at the night sky. What Göbekli Tepe forces us to confront is a question that cuts to the heart of how we understand ourselves as a species. We have long assumed that religion, monumental architecture, complex symbolic thought, and organized communal effort were products of the agricultural revolution. That the settled life of farmers, with its surplus food and its fixed communities, was what made these things possible. Göbekli Tepe was built by hunter-gatherers who had none of those supposed prerequisites. This means one of two things. Either our model of how civilization develops was simply wrong, that complex symbolic and social life preceded rather than followed agriculture, or that Göbekli Tepe itself played some role in the development of agriculture in this region, that the gatherings required to build and maintain this sanctuary created the conditions under which settled life became attractive or necessary. Some researchers have proposed exactly this, noting that the site sits at the northern edge of the region where wheat and several other founder crops of agriculture were first domesticated, and that the effort of feeding the workforce that built Göbekli Tepe may have created demand for a more reliable food supply than pure foraging could provide.
The animals carved on the pillars are almost entirely wild species. There are no domesticated animals, but they are the ancestors of domesticated animals, the wild cattle, wild boar, wild sheep, whose descendants would become the farmyard animals of the Neolithic revolution that followed. The people of Göbekli Tepe were living at the cusp of one of the most profound transitions in human history. They may not have known that, but they were building monuments, watching the sky, carving their knowledge and their cosmology into stone, doing all the things that fully modern human minds do when they encounter the vast, beautiful, terrifying mystery of existence. The carvings on the vulture stone, that remarkable pillar in enclosure D, deserve particular attention. At the top of the pillar, a vulture stands with one wing raised, as if in flight or display. Below it, a round object that some researchers interpret as the sun or as a human skull rests near a headless human figure. Scorpion carvings, associated in later Mesopotamian astronomy with a specific region of the sky, appear on other pillars. The more researchers look at the animal carvings of Göbekli Tepe through an astronomical lens, the more possible stellar connections emerge. This does not mean that every carved animal was an astronomical symbol, but it does suggest that the sky and its contents were deeply embedded in the symbolic vocabulary of the people who made these carvings, as the sky was for virtually every culture on Earth before the advent of artificial light removed it from daily consciousness. The stars they watched are still there, the sky they mapped is still above us, and the stones, those extraordinary, silent, endlessly patient stones, are still telling their story to anyone willing to listen.
Let us move now to the coast of Brittany in northwestern France, to a flat, wind-swept landscape of heath and farmland and low stone walls, where the Atlantic light falls soft and silver across the countryside, and the air carries the faint salt of the sea. Here, in and around the small town of Karnak, there is an arrangement of standing stones so vast in scale, so sweeping in its ambition, that walking among it feels less like visiting a monument and more like walking through a landscape that has been fundamentally, permanently reimagined. The Karnak stones. More than 3,000 individual standing stones, perhaps originally as many as 4,000 or more, arranged in long parallel rows that march across the countryside for a distance of roughly 4 kilometers. The rows are organized into 3 main groups, each with its own character and history. The Menic alignment, the Kermario alignment, and the Kerleskan alignment. In addition to the rows, the broader Karnak landscape includes isolated standing stones, dolmens, burial mounds, and stone circles, all part of a prehistoric sacred landscape that was developed and expanded over many centuries. The stones themselves range from small knee-height markers to towering menhirs well over 4 meters tall. They are made of the local granite, rough-hewn and weathered to a color somewhere between grey and gold depending on the light and the season. They do not shimmer, they do not gleam. They stand in their rows with a kind of patient, earth-bound stubbornness, worn smooth by millennia of Breton rain, populated by mosses and lichens that cling to their surfaces in patches of green and orange and black.
Walking along a row of Karnak stones, you become aware of a rhythm. There is something almost musical about the spacing, the way the stones increase in height as you walk from east to west along the Menec alignment. The largest stones at the western end, the smallest at the eastern end, as if the rows were designed to be walked in a specific direction, building towards something. At the western end of the Menec alignment, the rows converge on an egg-shaped stone enclosure, an oval setting of smaller stones that brackets the end of the lines like a full stop at the end of a sentence. What were these rows for? That question has occupied researchers for well over a century, and the answers that have been proposed span an enormous range. Some early theories suggested the rows were a Roman military camp, an idea quickly abandoned. Others proposed they were the petrified soldiers of a Breton saint, transformed to stone as punishment for persecuting him. More recent research has focused on astronomical alignments. Analysis of the orientations of the main alignments shows that the rows are broadly oriented toward the rising or setting of celestial bodies, and some researchers have proposed that specific rows correspond to the rising of the moon at its major and minor standstills, the same 18.6-year lunar cycle that appears encoded in Stonehenge's station stones.
Researcher Alexander Thom, a Scottish engineer who spent much of his career surveying and analysing megalithic sites across Britain and France, proposed in the 1970s that the Karnak alignments were part of a vast prehistoric lunar observatory used to observe and predict the complex wobbles in the moon's path across the sky. His analysis suggested that the long, straight rows of stones were used as sighting lines, allowing observers to track the moon's position with considerable precision over many years of observation. More recently, researchers have proposed that the rows may have served multiple functions simultaneously, as processional routes for seasonal ceremonies, as markers of territorial boundaries, as memorials for the dead, and as astronomical instruments, all woven together in a single enormous landscape project that was added to and adjusted over many centuries. The dates for the main alignments range from roughly 4,500 to 3,300 BC, meaning the site spans more than 1,000 years of continuous activity, with different generations contributing different elements in a slow, cumulative act of landscape making. The sheer labour involved in the Karnak alignments is staggering. These are not small stones dropped casually in a field. Quarrying, transporting and erecting several thousand multi-ton blocks of granite over a large and uneven landscape required organisation, leadership, planning and sustained collective effort across many generations. Something was motivating this effort on a very large scale, something important enough to organise an entire society around for centuries.
Was it the sky? Probably, at least in part. The moon's movements are complex and baffling to observe without a systematic approach, and a landscape of aligned stones stretching for kilometers would have provided exactly the kind of extended sighting lines needed to track subtle lunar motions over the long cycles they follow. Standing at the eastern end of a row and sighting along it to the western horizon, you could mark where the moon rose or set against a specific stone and return year after year to watch the pattern change. The Karnak stones are not well known outside of France and among archaeology enthusiasts, and that is a pity, because they represent one of the most ambitious sky-watching projects in all of human history. Not a single monument, but an entire landscape, reshaped and reorganized around the movements of the sky. Built piece by piece over a millennium by people whose names are completely unknown, whose language is entirely lost, but whose patient, monumental attention to the moon and stars is still visible, still legible, in those long, quiet rows of granite, standing in the Breton countryside. To walk the melic alignment at dusk, as the sun goes down in the west, and the long shadows of the stones fall eastward across the moorland, is to feel something that goes beyond archaeology. The rows stretch ahead of you and behind you, the stones varying in height, irregular in shape, but rhythmic in spacing, like the beats of a slow and ancient music. The wind comes in from the Atlantic, carrying the smell of salt and heather. The light changes, the stones change with it, from warm gold to deep grey, to a kind of silver darkness as the sky deepens. And somewhere ahead, at the end of the row you are walking, the stones converge on their enclosure, their terminal point, their full stop. You do not know what ceremony was conducted there. You do not know what the people who walked this same alignment in the same direction at the same time of year 4,000 years ago were wearing or saying or feeling. But you know they were here. You know they built this, and you know that whatever they were watching in the sky, it mattered to them enormously. You can feel the mattering in the stones. That is perhaps all we can truly know of Karnak. The intention was enormous, the effort was immense, the sky was involved, and the stones, patient and weathered and utterly certain of themselves, are still here. We go north now, much further north, to the outer Hebrides of Scotland, to a long, narrow island called Lewis, where the land is made of ancient Lewisian gneiss, some of the oldest rock on the surface of the earth, 3 billion years old, more than twice the age of the first dinosaurs. The landscape of Lewis is spare and beautiful, a treeless expanse of peat moorland, lochs and low hills, open to every wind that comes in off the Atlantic, under a sky that can change from clear blue to slate grey to luminous gold within the space of an hour. In the western part of the island, on a promontory above Loch Rogue, there is a stone circle called Callanish. Built around 2900 BC, roughly 5,000 years ago, Callanish is in many ways the most visually striking of all the British stone circles. Unlike Stonehenge, which stands in a flat, open plain and presents itself as a single unit, Callanish has a more elongated, complex shape, a circle of tall, thin stones with a single monolith at its centre, around 4.5 meters tall, surrounded by 4 avenues of stones radiating outward like the arms of a cross.
The main avenue runs to the north for roughly 90 meters, a double row of stones forming a kind of ceremonial approach to the circle from that direction.
The stones of Callanish are made of Lewisian gneiss, the same ancient rock as the island itself, grey and streaked with white, worn and pitted by millennia of Hebridean weather. They are tall and thin, more like standing slabs than the bulky, rounded boulders of Stonehenge, and they give the circle a different atmosphere entirely. Where Stonehenge feels monumental and dominant, Callanish feels attenuated, reaching, as if the stones are stretching upward towards the sky they were made to observe. And what a sky they observed! At the latitude of Lewis, something remarkable happens with the moon at its major lunar standstill, that rare extreme in the moon's 18.6-year cycle, when the moon reaches its maximum northerly and southerly positions on the horizon. At this latitude, when the moon reaches its major standstill position and rises in the south at its lowest declination, it barely clears the local horizon before setting again. And at Callanish, which sits above a landscape that includes a distinctive hill to the south called Knock and Tursa, or Hill of Sorrow, the full moon at its major standstill position appears to skim along the ridgeline of that hill before entering the stone circle from the south, moving down the avenue formed by the circle's southern row of stones, and then setting in the southwest.
Observers who have watched this event, which last occurred in its fullest form in 1987 and will occur again in the mid-2030s, describe it in hushed terms. The moon, seen from within the circle, appears to walk across the hills and enter the sacred space of the stones as if invited, as if expected. The local hill profile creates a kind of visual drama that makes the moon seem much closer to the earth than usual, enormous and luminous, sliding along the horizon before disappearing. Those who built Callanish chose their site not just for its prominence in the landscape, but for this specific astronomical theatre, this once-per-generation event when the moon descends to its lowest, most southerly path and appears to enter the circle with an almost ceremonial deliberateness. The major lunar standstill is extraordinarily difficult to predict and understand without sustained observation across many decades. The moon's declination, its north-south position in the sky, varies over an 18.6-year cycle, and the full range of that variation is only visible if you watch and record patiently across most of a human lifetime. The people who built Callanish must have known about this cycle. Their choice of this particular latitude, their orientation of the monument, the way the southern avenue frames the approaching moon as it enters from the hillside, all of this suggests deliberate, informed planning based on astronomical knowledge accumulated over generations.
In the 19th century, the stones of Callanish were buried up to their necks in peat, which had accumulated over them across the centuries. When the peat was cleared in 1857, the full height of the stones was revealed for the first time in perhaps 3,000 years. Local traditions had preserved memories of the site as a place of great importance, and some legends spoke of a tall priest who came annually to the circle at midsummer, arriving with birds at dawn. Whether this tradition preserves a genuine memory of ancient ceremony, or is simply a story that grew up around a mysterious and ancient place, we cannot know.
What we do know is that Callanish was not used for a few generations and then abandoned. The evidence suggests the site was in active use for many hundreds of years, from its construction around 2900 BC through a lengthy period of ceremony and observation, before the slow accumulation of peat began to cover the stones. During those centuries, perhaps 100 generations of people came to this windswept promontory to watch the sky. 100 generations of Lewis Islanders who knew which stone corresponded to which horizon marker, who understood the significance of what they were watching, who perhaps felt the same catch of breath, the same involuntary stillness that observers feel today when the moon descends to the hills on its standstill cycle and appears to enter the circle.
The island of Lewis itself is a remarkable place to set an observatory. At 58 degrees north latitude, it sits in a band where the sky's behavior is dramatic and extreme. The summer solstice brings near continuous daylight, long twilights that never fully darken into night. The winter solstice brings only 7 hours of pale light and 17 hours of darkness. The moon's movements at this latitude are more pronounced than at the more southerly latitudes where Stonehenge and Newgrange stand. And the major lunar standstill event, when the moon's already extreme declination reaches its 18.6-year maximum, produces the most visually spectacular astronomical event observable from the British Isles. The builders of Callanish chose their latitude deliberately, or at the very least, their precise latitude was fundamental to why the monument works so specifically. At a slightly different latitude, the moon at its major standstill would not skim the local hills in the same way, would not appear to enter the circle from the south in the same choreographed manner. The specific latitude of Lewis creates a specific astronomical theatre that Callanish was built to frame. This is either an extraordinary coincidence or evidence of a level of astronomical geographic awareness, an understanding that different locations on the Earth offer different sky phenomena, that is remarkable for any period of human history, let alone 5,000 years ago. The Callanish stones also quietly demonstrate something important about the nature of archaeoastronomy as a field of study. Unlike studying a document or a painting, studying an astronomical alignment requires that you bring the sky with you, either by visiting the site at the right moment and watching what happens, or by using astronomical software to reconstruct the ancient sky and calculate what an observer at that location would have seen at a specific date and time thousands of years ago. The discipline sits at the intersection of archaeology, astronomy, anthropology, and sometimes geology and landscape analysis. And the best work in the field requires competence in all of these areas simultaneously. It is a demanding and humbling discipline, full of genuine uncertainty, full of cases where the evidence is suggestive but not conclusive, where the alignment is real but the meaning is lost, where the monument is extraordinary but the builder is silent. Yet the discoveries it has made are among the most humanizing in all of science. To stand at a site and realize that people were here, watching the same sky you are watching, organizing their most important ceremonies around the same moments you are measuring with your instruments, is to feel the continuity of the human project in a visceral and immediate way. The sky connects us to them. The monuments they built are the evidence that the connection is real.
Something about its spare, elegant geometry against the wide Hebridean sky makes you want to tell stories about it, to imagine the people who came here in the cold Atlantic nights, wrapped against the wind, watching for the moon to descend from the south and walk among the stones. That image, the great full moon hanging low above the hill, reflected in the still waters of the loch, moving slowly into the embrace of the circle, is one of the most beautiful things that ancient astronomy produced anywhere in the world. Section 7. The Nazca Lines, Desert Drawings that Point to the Stars. Let us travel now to the other side of the world, to the high desert plateau of southern Peru, to a place called the Pampa Colorada, the Red Plain, where the Nazca people drew pictures in the ground that are so large they can only be fully understood from the air.
The Nazca Lines. Perhaps no ancient site on Earth has generated more wild speculation or more sober scholarly debate than this extraordinary collection of geoglyphs, drawings made by removing the reddish surface pebbles of the desert floor to reveal the pale yellowish-grey earth beneath. Created between roughly 500 BC and 500 AD by the Nazca culture, a sophisticated pre-Inca civilization that flourished in this arid coastal region of South America, the lines include hundreds of straight geometric forms, many of them extending for kilometers with remarkable straightness, as well as dozens of large figurative images, animal shapes drawn in a single continuous line that spirals and curves across the desert floor. Hummingbirds, monkeys, spiders, condors, whales, a human figure with large round eyes, fish, flowers, hands. The figures, ranging from about 30 meters to nearly 300 meters across, are drawn with a line anywhere from 10 to 30 centimeters wide, absolutely visible from ground level to a careful observer, but only fully comprehensible in their entirety from altitude. They were made by meticulous planning and execution, surveys conducted with stakes and string at ground level by craftspeople who could translate a design from a small sample into a large-scale ground drawing with impressive accuracy. The astronomical theory for the Nazca Lines was first developed seriously by American astronomer Paul Kosok in the 1940s, and then expanded by German mathematician Maria Reich, who devoted much of her life to studying and protecting the lines. They proposed that many of the straight lines pointed towards specific astronomical events, the rising and setting of the sun at the solstices and equinoxes, the rising of specific stars, the movements of the moon. Reich, in particular, believed the lines formed a vast astronomical calendar, a sky map drawn on the ground at enormous scale. Later analysis by astronomer Gerald Hawkins, who had also famously studied Stonehenge, tested this theory rigorously and found that the astronomical alignments in the Nazca Lines were no more frequent than would be expected by chance, suggesting that if astronomy was involved, it was not the primary organizing principle of the entire site. This remains the position of many researchers. However, more recent work has refined the picture considerably. While the overall field of lines does not seem to function as a single unified star map, specific individual lines and figures do appear to have astronomical significance. The large spider figure has been proposed to correspond to the constellation Orion, with its leg pointing towards the star Eta Orionis, as it would have risen above the horizon during the Nazca period. The hummingbird is oriented so that its beak points toward the sunrise at the winter solstice in the southern hemisphere,
The monkey's distinctive curling tail points toward the constellation Ursa Minor, the Little Bear, which contains the pole star.
Perhaps most convincingly, many of the straight trapezoidal lines have been linked to water sources, underground aqueducts, and seasonal water flows, with the astronomical alignments serving as markers for the times of year when water would be available or when rainfall would begin. In the hyper-arid environment of the Nazca Desert, where annual rainfall is measured in millimeters, the connection between sky watching and water management would have been absolutely vital. Knowing when the stars rose that signaled the arrival of the rainy season in the mountains to the east, where the rivers that fed the desert's underground water table originated, was a matter of life and death. So perhaps the Nazca lines are not purely astronomical, not purely ceremonial, not purely hydrological, but all three at once. A landscape of meaning in which the movement of water, the movement of stars, and the movement of people through ritual were woven together into a single complex system, drawn at enormous scale on the blank red canvas of the desert, meant to be read not just by human eyes, but perhaps by the gods and celestial beings the Nazca culture believed inhabited the sky above them. They drew their world on the ground and aligned it with the heavens, and the desert, too dry to erode the lines in the 1500 years since the Nazca culture's decline, preserved their work faithfully, waiting for the age of aircraft and satellite photography to come along and finally show us what they made.
The Nazca culture itself deserves more than a footnote in this story. These were sophisticated people, skilled in ceramics, textiles, and hydraulic engineering. Their polychrome pottery is among the most beautiful produced anywhere in the ancient Americas, decorated with images of supernatural beings, agricultural products, and astronomical motifs. They built an extensive network of underground aqueducts called puquios that captured the seasonal water table and distributed it to their fields and settlements, a feat of hydrological engineering that continues to supply water to communities in the region today. Some researchers have proposed that the straight lines radiating from central points in the Nazca geoglyph field correspond to the puquio system, mapping the underground water network on the surface of the earth as a kind of visual prayer to the water spirits or huacas that Nazca religion associated with the sources of life. The mountain peaks visible on the horizon from the Pampa Colorada are also relevant. In Andean cosmology, high mountains are sacred, associated with the deities who control rain and fertility. The water that eventually reaches the desert coast originates as snow on those mountain summits. Several of the long straight lines point toward specific mountain peaks, suggesting that the lines were meant to create a visual and perhaps spiritual connection between the flat desert and the distant sources of life-giving water, with the sky serving as the mediating element between earth and mountain and community.
The Bighorn Medicine Wheel, a large circular arrangement of stones about 28 meters in diameter, with a central cairn of piled rocks connected to the outer ring by 28 stone lines radiating outward like the spokes of a wheel, and 6 smaller cairns positioned around the outer rim. It sits at the edge of a high alpine meadow where the wind is nearly constant and the summer season is brief and intense, with the vast sweep of the Wyoming plains visible far below to the east and the mountain ridges rising to the west. The term medicine wheel
is a general name for this type of site found across the northern Great Plains of North America. More than 150 medicine wheels have been identified across Wyoming, Montana, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, ranging in size from just a few meters to the enormous Majorville medicine wheel in Alberta, which has an estimated age of more than 4,500 years, making it contemporary with the earliest phases of Stonehenge. They were made by various indigenous peoples of the Great Plains over thousands of years, and different examples have different designs, different ages, and almost certainly different specific purposes, though many share the wheel shape with central cairn and radiating spokes.
The astronomical analysis of the Bighorn medicine wheel was first conducted seriously by University of Maryland astronomer Jack Eddy in the 1970s. Using careful measurements of the positions of the cairns relative to each other and to the local horizon, Eddy found a series of striking astronomical alignments. One pair of cairns aligns with the sunrise on the summer solstice. Another pair aligns with the sunset on the summer solstice. Additional cairn-to-cairn alignments correspond to the heliacal rising of several bright stars, meaning the morning when a star first becomes visible just before sunrise after being hidden behind the sun for part of the year. The stars in question, Aldebaran, Rigel, and Sirius, are among the brightest stars in the sky and have been used as calendar markers by cultures around the world. Specifically, the heliacal rising of Aldebaran at the Bighorn site's latitude would have occurred about 28 days before the summer solstice, serving as a reliable advance warning that midsummer was approaching. Rigel would have risen heliacally close to the solstice itself. Sirius, brightest star in the night sky, would have followed about a month later. The sequence of stellar risings thus provided a calendar of markers stretching across the critical summer season, when the short growing season at high altitude demanded precise timing for agricultural and ceremonial activities. Further north, in Saskatchewan, Canada, the Moose Mountain medicine wheel shows similar alignments to the summer solstice sunrise and to the heliacal risings of the same three stars, Aldebaran, Rigel, and Sirius, arranged in the same basic pattern as Bighorn. Moose Mountain is estimated to be around 2,500 years old, and the correspondence between its alignments and those of Bighorn, sites separated by hundreds of miles and potentially by centuries in construction date, suggests that the astronomical knowledge encoded in these structures was a shared, transmitted tradition across a large geographic area and across many generations of indigenous skywatchers. The Bighorn medicine wheel itself is still a site of active spiritual significance to numerous indigenous peoples of the Northern Plains, including the Crow, Chushembe, Arapaho, Cheyenne, and others, who continue to conduct ceremonies there and regard it as a sacred landscape. The astronomical alignments identified by modern researchers do not exhaust or define the meaning of the site. They represent one dimension of a complex, layered significance that the wheel carries for the peoples whose ancestors built and used it. But the astronomical precision is real and remarkable. That people at high altitude on the wind-swept northern plains, working with simple stone tools and naked-eye observation, could construct a monument accurate enough to mark the summer solstice sunrise and the heliacal risings of specific bright stars is a testament to the same quality of patient, careful, generationally transmitted sky observation that built Stonehenge and Newgrange. The tools were different, the stones were different, the stars were the same. Section 9. Mnachtra and Hajakim, Month's prehistoric solar temples. In the deep,
warm blue of the Mediterranean Sea, south of Sicily, and roughly 300 kilometers north of the Libyan coast, there is a small archipelago called Malta that contains per square kilometer of land area more prehistoric monuments than perhaps anywhere else on Earth. The Maltese Islands were first settled by Neolithic farmers around 5400 BC, who came from Sicily in small boats carrying their livestock and grain, and who over the following 2,000 years built an extraordinary series of megalithic temples, unlike anything found elsewhere in Europe, using the local coralline limestone to create curvilinear, trefoil-shaped temple complexes with massive walls and intricate internal arrangements. The most famous of these temples for their astronomical properties are Menidra and Hagar Keem, two separate complexes that stand in close proximity on a plateau overlooking the sea on the southwestern coast of Malta, built between roughly 3600 and 3200 BC. Hagar Keem, whose name translates approximately as standing stones or worshipping stones, is a massive complex of limestone walls, some of the stones weighing over 20 tons, arranged in the characteristic Maltese temple plan of overlapping semicircular apses. During the equinoxes, a narrow band of sunlight enters through a specific hole in the monument and illuminates a dressed stone surface within, creating a precise visual marker for the moment when day and night are equal. But it is the nearby temple of Nagidra that shows the most sophisticated solar calendar function. Nagidra consists of 3 conjoined temples of different ages, and the southernmost temple in the complex is oriented precisely so that the rising sun on the spring and autumn equinoxes shines directly down the main corridor and strikes the central altar. On the winter solstice, the first light of the rising sun instead falls on the left edge of the main doorway and casts a focused beam onto a specific megalithic slab to the right of the apse entrance. On the summer solstice, the same alignment works in reverse, with light illuminating the right edge of the doorway and casting its beam to the left. The movement of the solstice light beams thus tracks the sun through the year, functioning as a kind of stone calendar that any observer could read simply by watching where the sunrise light fell within the temple. The precision of these alignments has been verified by modern archaeo-astronomical survey and is considered genuine. The temple builders of Nagidra, working 5,000 years ago with hand tools and local stone, achieved solar alignments accurate enough to distinguish the equinoxes from the solstices and to mark the specific positions of the sun's rising point at each of these 4 key moments of the year.
The Maltese temples were in use for roughly 1,000 years before being abandoned suddenly around 2500 BC, for reasons that remain debated. The people who built them left no written records and no clear successors. Their culture, remarkable for its sophistication, simply ends in the archaeological record without clear explanation. What remains are the stones, the alignments, and the extraordinary Venus figurines and other ceremonial objects found within the temples, suggesting a society deeply invested in ritual, ceremony, and the precise measurement of time as marked by the sun. Walking among the limestone walls of Nidra on a clear morning, with the sea gleaming below and the warm Mediterranean light falling across the ancient stones, you can easily imagine the moment of the equinox, the excitement of watching the sunrise find its mark, the communal recognition that the year had reached its turning point again. These were not abstract intellectual observations.
They were moments of profound cultural and spiritual significance, celebrated in structures built to make that significance visible, tangible, permanent. Section 10. The Egyptian Pyramids and Orion's Belt. Of all the astronomical theories associated with the ancient world, perhaps none has captured the public imagination as completely and generated as much scholarly controversy as the Orion correlation theory applied to the pyramids of Giza.
The theory, first proposed by Robert Bauval and Adrian Gilbert in the early 1990s, suggests that the three main pyramids of the Giza complex, the Great Pyramid of Khufu, the Pyramid of Khafre, and the smaller Pyramid of Menkaure, are positioned on the landscape in a way that deliberately mirrors the arrangement of the three belt stars of the constellation Orion, known in ancient Egyptian as Sa, which was associated with the god Osiris, ruler of the dead and the afterlife. The three belt stars, Al-Nitak, Al-Nilam, and Mintaka, form a slightly offset line, just as the three pyramids do, with the smallest star corresponding to the smallest pyramid. Bauval additionally proposed that the Nile River corresponds to the Milky Way, and that the broader layout of the Giza necropolis, including the smaller satellite pyramids, reflects other elements of the Orion constellation and its surroundings. This theory has been hotly contested in academic circles. Critics point out that the correlation, while visually striking, is not geometrically precise, that the angle of offset does not match exactly, and that the identification of which pyramid corresponds to which star involves some interpretation. Some mainstream Egyptologists reject the theory entirely, arguing that the pyramids were positioned based on practical considerations of terrain, sightlines, and the administrative organization of the necropolis, not astronomical symbolism. However, even without the Orion correlation theory, the astronomical knowledge encoded in the Great Pyramid is extraordinary and is not disputed. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, built around 2560 BC under the reign of Pharaoh Khufu of the 4th dynasty, is oriented to the 4 cardinal directions with an accuracy that has never ceased to amaze surveyors. The sides of the pyramid face north, south, east, and west to within a small fraction of a single degree of error. Achieving this level of precision using only naked eye astronomical observations and simple instruments required either the use of stellar transit observations, watching stars cross the meridian, or careful observation of the shadow of a vertical stake through the day, or some combination of both. Recent research by Egyptologist Kate Spence proposed that the pyramid builders achieved their north alignment by sighting on the point midway between 2 circumpolar stars, Kokab and Mizar, which in 2500 BC were positioned symmetrically on either side of the celestial North Pole. When these 2 stars were in exact vertical alignment, their midpoint indicated true north, providing a precise enough reference to achieve the pyramid's extraordinary orientation. Then there are the air shafts. The Great Pyramid contains 4 narrow shafts, 2 rising from the king's chamber and 2 from the queen's chamber, angling upward through the pyramid's body at precise angles. For a long time, these were interpreted as ventilation shafts, but astronomer Virginia Trimble, working in 1964, proposed that the shafts from the king's chamber were oriented to point to specific stars as they crossed the meridian above the pyramid. The southern shaft pointed towards Orion's belt, specifically the star Al-Nitak. The northern shaft pointed towards Thuban, the pole star, as it would have been around 2500 BC. Later analysis extended this to the Queen's chamber shafts, finding alignments with Sirius in the south, the most important star in the Egyptian calendar, associated with the goddess Isis and with the annual Nile flood, and with the star Kokab in the north. Whether these shaft alignments were purely symbolic, intended to allow the pharaoh's soul to travel to the stars, or whether they also had practical observational functions, remains debated. But the combination of the cardinal point alignment of the exterior, the stellar orientations of the internal shafts, and the broader mythological importance of the stars of Orion and Sirius in Egyptian religion makes it very clear that the builders of Giza were thinking carefully about the sky. They did not simply happen to build a large pyramid. They built a cosmological instrument, a physical embodiment of their understanding of the relationship between the earth, the dead, and the stars.
The ancient Egyptians tracked the sky with extraordinary sophistication. Their calendar was based on the heliacal rising of Sirius, the star called Sopdet in Egyptian, which rose just before dawn in the eastern sky once per year, in a way that reliably predicted the arrival of the annual Nile flood by only a few weeks. This flood, the inundation, was the agricultural foundation of Egyptian civilization. Knowing when it was coming, with enough lead time to prepare, was essential, and the star that announced it became one of the most sacred objects in the Egyptian sky, associated with Isis, the model of divine motherhood and resurrection, rising annually to signal the renewal of the earth. This connection between Sirius, the flood, fertility, and the cycles of death and rebirth shaped Egyptian religion, art, and architecture for 3,000 years. And it began, as all these things began, with someone standing in the darkness before dawn, watching the eastern horizon, and noticing that the same bright star appeared at the same point in the year, year after year, and that this appearance reliably preceded the flood. Patient observation turning into calendar, into myth, into stone. The Egyptian sky was organized into a system of 36 constellations called decans, each one rising just before dawn at 10-day intervals throughout the year. These decans served as a clock through the night, their rising positions allowing trained observers to determine the time of night with considerable precision. The decans were associated with specific deities, specific hours, specific powers, and their movements through the year were tracked and recorded with great care. This decanal calendar is one of the earliest systematic stellar catalogues in human history, and its origins may predate even the pyramid-building age.
The temples of Egypt were built with astronomical alignments as fundamental design principles. The great temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak, built and expanded over many centuries, has its main axis aligned so that the rising sun at the winter solstice shines directly down the central corridor and illuminates the inner sanctuary. The Abu Simbel temples of Ramesses II, carved directly into the sandstone cliff of Nubia, are oriented so that twice per year the rising sun penetrates the entire length of the temple and illuminates all but one of the 4 divine statues in the innermost sanctuary, the one statue that remains in darkness being Ptah, the god of the underworld, who is deliberately excluded from the light. This biannual solar event was engineered with extraordinary precision into solid rock by craftspeople who calculated the needed orientation and depth of the temple in advance, working with a degree of precision that speaks to centuries of accumulated architectural and astronomical knowledge.
In this way, the entire Egyptian religious calendar was an astronomical calendar. The rhythm of worship and ceremony and agricultural life was synchronized to the sky. The sky was not a backdrop to Egyptian civilization. It was one of its foundations. Section 11. Chaco Canyon, the Anasazi Sun Dagger, and the Great Houses. In the high desert of northwestern New Mexico, in a landscape of flat-topped mesas and deep-cut arroyos, where the sky is enormous and the silence is nearly complete, there is a canyon called Chaco that for several centuries between roughly 800 and 1100 AD was the center of the most complex society in pre-Columbian North America, north of Mexico. The ancestral Puebloans, sometimes called the Anasazi, built here a network of great houses, massive multi-story stone buildings of extraordinary architectural sophistication, connected by a system of straight roads that radiated out from Chaco Canyon in multiple directions with remarkable geometric precision. The great houses, with names like Pueblo Bonito, Chetroquetl, Pueblo del Arroyo, and Penesco Blanco, were not primarily residential. They were ceremonial and administrative centers, places where hundreds or thousands of people gathered for important occasions, where goods were stored and distributed, where religious and political power was concentrated. And the Chacoan people were watching the sky with great care and sophistication. The most famous example is the Sun Dagger, a calendar device discovered on Fajada Butte, a prominent sandstone formation that rises from the canyon floor to a height of roughly 135 meters. Near the top of the butte, 3 large sandstone slabs that had fallen from the cliff face lean against the rock wall, creating narrow gaps between them. Behind the slabs, carved into the rock wall, are 2 spiral petroglyphs, one large and one small.
In 1977, artist Anna Sofia was climbing Fajada Butte when she noticed a dagger of light piercing through a gap between the slabs and striking the large spiral petroglyph. Over subsequent visits at different times of year, she and colleagues documented a remarkable series of light and shadow effects. On the summer solstice, a single dagger of light bisects the large spiral precisely down its center. On the winter solstice, 2 daggers of light appear on either side of the large spiral, bracketing it symmetrically. On the spring and autumn equinoxes, a dagger bisects the small spiral, and a separate beam grazes the right edge of the large spiral. The 4 most important moments in the solar year are each marked by a distinct and unambiguous light pattern, all produced by the same 3 stone slabs acting as a solar filter. The engineering of this device, whether deliberate or discovered by observation, is extraordinarily elegant. It requires no instruments, no calculations, no priests to interpret. Anyone watching can see, on the day of the solstice, the dagger of light split the spiral in half. The calendar is self-explanatory. Beyond Fajada Butte, astronomical orientations have been found throughout the Chaco Canyon site itself. The great houses show numerous solar and lunar alignments, with doorways, windows, and entire building walls oriented to mark the solstices, the equinoxes, and the standstills of the moon. Pueblo Bonito, the largest of the great houses, has a wall that bisects the complex from north to south, aligning perfectly with the meridian. And 2 windows in the east and west walls of a specific room allow light to enter and illuminate the opposite wall at the equinoxes. The straight roads of Chaco are also significant. Many of them extend in exact straight lines for tens of kilometers into the desert, regardless of terrain, running over mesas and down cliffs without deviation.
Several of the major roads are oriented toward the solstice sunrise or sunset, and the main north road from Chaco runs in an exactly straight line for some 60 kilometers north of the canyon before disappearing. Why these roads were straight, given that the Chacoan people had no wheeled vehicles and no horses, remains debated. But their geometric precision suggests an astronomical or cosmological significance rather than purely practical transportation function. The Chacoan system declined and was largely abandoned by around 1150 AD, possibly due to prolonged drought, social disruption, or a combination of factors. The descendants of the ancestral Puebloans are the modern Puebloan peoples of the American Southwest, including the Hopi, Zuni, Acoma, and many others, who maintain traditions, ceremonies, and astronomical knowledge that in some cases trace directly back to the Chacoan period. For these communities, the astronomical alignments at Chaco are not mere curiosities or intellectual puzzles, but living parts of a continuous cultural tradition that has never been entirely broken. Section 12. Angkor Wat, a temple complex built as a star map.
On the flat, steamy plains of northwestern Cambodia, surrounded by the dense green of tropical forest, there is a temple complex so large that it could comfortably contain several of the world's most famous cathedrals within its walls and still have room to spare. Angkor Wat, built in the early 12th century AD by the Khmer king Suryavarman II, is the largest religious monument ever constructed, covering an area of roughly 400 hectares, surrounded by a moat nearly 200 meters wide, and facing west in a deliberate reversal of the usual Khmer temple orientation toward the east. It is also, according to researchers who have studied its architectural geometry in detail, a monument of extraordinary astronomical precision. The most straightforward of Angkor Wat's astronomical alignments is the spring equinox sunrise. An observer standing at the western entrance gate of the temple on the morning of the spring equinox watches the sun rise directly above the central tower, the highest spire of the five-towered main sanctuary. This alignment has been confirmed by survey and is considered deliberate. The spring equinox, in the Hindu calendar tradition that shaped Khmer religious culture, was a moment of particular cosmic significance, associated with the renewal of the world and the victory of order over chaos.
But researchers have found much more than the equinox alignment. Eleanor Maneker, an art historian whose study of Angkor Wat's dimensions was published in the 1996, proposed that the temple encodes the Hindu cosmological time cycle called the Yuga system in its measured distances. Specifically, the distances between key points in the temple's layout, measured in units called cubits, correspond to the 4 ages of the world in the Hindu cosmic cycle. While this interpretation is contested and involves some selectivity in which measurements are used, several of the relationships Maneker identified have been confirmed as intentional by independent researchers. Perhaps more broadly convincing is the work of Robert Stencil, Fred Gifford, and Eleanor Moran, who in the 1970s demonstrated that the main axes of the complex show multiple solar alignments throughout the year, with the towers and gates serving as horizon markers for observers standing at specific points within the complex. The architecture functions, in this interpretation, as a solar calendar instrument, in which the positions of the sun relative to the towers at different times of year could be tracked from designated observation points.
The most ambitious astronomical claim made about Angkor Wat is that the entire complex, viewed from above, mirrors the arrangement of stars in the constellation Draco as they appeared in the year 10,500 BC. This theory, proposed by John Grigsby, involves the same precession of the equinoxes that appears in other astronomical alignment theories and has been debated extensively. Unlike the Orion correlation theory for the Giza pyramids, the Angkor-Draco alignment requires imagining the sky as it appeared about 12,000 years before the temple was built, which most researchers find too remote in time to support. What is not debated is the more modest but still remarkable finding that specific towers in the outer galleries of Angkor Wat serve as markers for the winter and summer solstice sunrises and sunsets, as observed from specific courtyards within the complex. And the overall orientation of the temple to the west, unusual for Khmer architecture, appears to be specifically designed to enable observation of the setting sun throughout the year, with the main causeway functioning as an extended sighting line for solar observations. Angkor Wat was not just a temple. It was a cosmological statement made in stone, a representation of the Hindu universe in 3 dimensions, designed to align with the movements of the heavens and to participate in the cycles of cosmic time. The Khmer engineers and priests who designed it were drawing on centuries of accumulated astronomical knowledge from India, enriched by their own tradition of sky observation in the Cambodian landscape, and translating that knowledge into the most ambitious single architectural project in the history of Southeast Asia. Section 13. Maze Ho and the Orkney Darkness. Not far to the north of the Scottish mainland, in the Orkney Islands, there is a Neolithic chambered cairn called Maze Ho that was built around 3100 BC, making it roughly contemporary with Newgrange in Ireland. Like Newgrange, it is aligned to the winter solstice. Like Newgrange, it channels a beam of light into its inner chamber on the longest nights of the year. And like Newgrange, it was built by a farming community who clearly regarded the winter solstice as the most important astronomical event of the year, worthy of the enormous collective effort required to build a monument of this kind. Maze Ho is a large mound about 7 meters high and roughly 35 meters in diameter, covering a stone-built chamber approached by a long entrance passage about 11 meters in length. The stones used in its construction are enormous, some of the single-wall slabs measuring nearly 3 meters in height. The construction required not just the quarrying and movement of very large stones, but an extraordinarily precise engineering capability, as the corbelled inner roof of the chamber has stood without mortar or structural failure for 5,000 years. On the days surrounding the winter solstice, the setting sun shines directly down the entrance passage and illuminates the back wall of the inner chamber in a golden beam that lasts for roughly 30 minutes before the sun drops below the horizon. The alignment is not quite as precise as Newgrange, but is clearly intentional, and the moment of illumination, occurring as it does at sunset on the shortest days of the year, creates the same effect of profound symbolic resonance. The darkness of the tomb is filled for a brief moment with the light of the turning year. Maze Ho is part of the Heart of Neolithic Orkney, a UNESCO World Heritage Site that includes several other remarkable monuments nearby, among them the Ring of Brodgar and the Stones of Stennis, both stone circles that add further astronomical dimensions to this extraordinary concentration of Neolithic activity.
The Ring of Brodgar, about 4 kilometers northwest of Maze Ho, is a circle of standing stones roughly 104 meters in diameter, originally consisting of 60 stones, of which 27 survive. It sits on a narrow isthmus of land between two lochs in a landscape of dramatic beauty. Its precise astronomical alignments are less clearly documented than those of Maze Ho, but it forms part of the same ceremonial landscape and was clearly part of the same sky-watching culture. Maze Ho itself became famous in the medieval period, when a group of Norse crusaders seeking shelter from a blizzard broke into the mound and spent several days or weeks inside, passing the time by carving runic inscriptions into the walls. These carvings, dating from around 1150 AD, include some of the largest collection of runic inscriptions anywhere in the world, along with carvings of a walrus, a dragon, and a serpent knot. The Norsemen clearly knew they were in a remarkable place. Their inscriptions include comments about treasure hidden in the mound, references to a beautiful woman, and the intriguing statement that it is long ago that a great treasure was hidden here. No treasure has ever been found, but the monument itself, silent and patient in the Orkney landscape, aligned to the winter sunset with 5,000-year-old precision, is a treasure of a different kind. Section 14. Standing Stones Across Africa, Namaratonga and Nabta Playa. It is a common, persistent, and fundamentally inaccurate assumption that sophisticated prehistoric astronomy was largely a European or Near Eastern phenomenon, that the stone circles and alignments of Britain, France, Turkey, and the Mediterranean were the primary locations where ancient peoples developed the knowledge to track and mark the sky. The archaeological evidence tells a very different story. Some of the oldest and most sophisticated astronomical monuments in the world are in Africa. Let us go first to the Nubian desert of southern Egypt, to a dry basin about 800 kilometers south of Cairo and roughly 100 kilometers west of the great temples of Abu Simbel. This basin is called Nabta Playa. Today it is a silent, empty bowl of cracked mud and sand baking under the Egyptian sun, utterly hostile to human habitation. But around 6,000 years ago, between roughly 5,000 and 3,500 BC, this basin experienced seasonal monsoon rains that made it a habitable, even productive environment. Nomadic and semi-nomadic cattle herders moved through the area seasonally, coming to the Nabta Basin when the rains came and moving away when they dried up. And they built things. The most remarkable of their constructions is a stone circle, now known as the Calendar Circle, discovered by American archaeologist Fred Wendorf and his colleagues in the 1970s. The circle consists of 29 stones arranged in a rough ring about 4 meters in diameter, with several pairs of taller stones called gates placed within the ring. The 29 stones are an unmistakable lunar reference, corresponding to the roughly 29.5 days of the lunar month. The gates within the circle are aligned to the approximate direction of summer solstice sunrise and to the rising of several important stars, including Sirius, Aldebaran, and stars within the constellation Orion, as they would have appeared from this site around 6,000 years ago. The summer solstice was of paramount importance to the people of Nabta Playa, because it coincided with the beginning of the life-sustaining monsoon rains. A precise stone marker for the moment of summer solstice, built and maintained on the same basin floor where the rain would come, represents the most practical possible application of astronomical knowledge. knowing exactly when the longest day arrived and that the rains would follow within weeks, allowed these nomadic cattle herders to synchronize their movements, their ceremonies, and their planning with the cycles of the sky in a way that was literally essential for their survival. Surrounding the calendar circle, Wendorf and his team found dozens of large stone slabs, some weighing several tons, arranged in geometric configurations and buried below the surface, with their flat sides facing up, as if deliberately placed in a precise spatial arrangement. When these were mapped and analyzed, they revealed alignments pointing to specific stars, including Arcturus, the Southern Cross, and the belt stars of Orion, as they rose or transited the meridian thousands of years ago. The site, now studied as one of the oldest astronomical sites in the world, predates Stonehenge by roughly 1,000 years. Now let us travel south and east across the African continent to the shores of Lake Turkana in northern Kenya, near the boundary with Ethiopia, to a site called Namaratungata II. The name refers to a large group of stone pillars, tall, thin basalt standing stones erected in an open-air configuration, dating to around 2400 BC, based on careful radiocarbon analysis. The site was first reported by archaeologists Lynch and Robbins in 1978 in the journal Science, in a paper whose title was straightforward and remarkable: Namaratungata, the first archaeoastronomical evidence in sub-Saharan Africa.
The alignment of the Namaratunga pillars, when analyzed using computer simulations of the ancient sky, corresponds to the positions of 8 specific stars, including Triangulum, the Pleiades, Bellatrix, Betelgeuse, Aldebaran, stars within Orion, Saiph, and Sirius, as they appeared above the East African horizon around 2400 BC. These 8 stars are precisely the stars used by the Borana Oromo people of Ethiopia and Kenya in their traditional calendar system, an oral and observational calendar that synchronizes lunar months with the rising and setting of specific stars to create a 12-month year. The Cushitic calendar, as it is known academically, has been in continuous use in this region in some form for an extraordinarily long time, and the Namaratunga site appears to represent its ancient material form, a stone monument built to facilitate or commemorate the stellar observations on which the calendar was based. Together, Nabta Playa and Namaratunga remind us that the impulse to build astronomical monuments, to record the sky in stone, to create permanent physical instruments for tracking celestial cycles, was not a uniquely European or Near Eastern development. It was a human development, appearing independently and repeatedly wherever people lived under open skies and needed to organize their lives around the movements of the heavens. Section 15. The pattern beneath it all. Why every ancient culture looked up. We have traveled far tonight. We have stood at stone circles in the rain-swept Hebrides and in the desert heat of Nubia. We have walked along rows of granite in Brittany and looked up at the winter solstice light entering a chamber in Ireland. We have read the stars in carved spirals and T-shaped pillars and geometric desert drawings and the angles of pyramid shafts. And now perhaps it is worth pausing and asking a question that seems simple but turns out to be very deep. Why? Why did every ancient culture across every inhabited continent independently develop the practice of building astronomical monuments? Why did the people of Neolithic Europe, of Bronze Age North America, of ancient Egypt, of pre-Inca Peru, of Neolithic Turkey, of megalithic Malta, and of pastoral Kenya
all feel the same urgent need to mark the sky in stone? The practical answer is the one we have touched on throughout this journey. Time. The need to know where you are in the year with enough precision to manage your agriculture, your herding, your seasonal movements, your food storage, your water use. In an agricultural society, knowing the date of the spring equinox to within a few days could mean the difference between a successful harvest and a failed one. Planting too early risked killing frost. Planting too late shortened the growing season. Knowing exactly when the sun rose at the equinox by observing where its first light fell in a stone chamber or along a sighted line of standing stones gave farmers a reliable, repeatable, year-round calendar marker without the need for counting or writing.
But the practical answer, while true, feels insufficient by itself. The monuments are too large, too beautiful, too carefully made, too invested with symbolic richness to be simply utilitarian instruments. The 17-minute beam of winter solstice light travelling through Newgrange is not primarily a calendar device. It is a ceremony, it is theatre, it is a performance staged for the dead and the living together, a statement about the relationship between darkness and light, between the bones of the ancestors and the warmth of the returning sun, between death and rebirth that goes far beyond agricultural scheduling. The deeper answer involves the sky's role as the ultimate clock, calendar, and cosmological text for all pre-literate societies. The sky was constant, it was reliable. In a world where nothing else was predictable, where famine, flood, disease, and conflict were constant threats, the sky followed its cycles with absolute fidelity. The sun rose and set, the seasons came and went, the stars returned to the same positions year after year, century after century, millennium after millennium. In the sky you could see order, you could see regularity, you could see the proof that the universe was not chaotic, that it followed rules, that those rules could be learned and used. The monuments were ways of participating in that order. By aligning your sacred buildings with the movements of the sun and stars, you were declaring your community's relationship with the cosmic. You were not just passively observing the sky. You were building a structure that would make the sky's movements visible, tangible, part of the fabric of daily life. The winter solstice sunrise was not just an astronomical event. It was an event that happened in your monument, to your dead, in your sacred space. The sky came to you. You were part of its order. Death and rebirth are perhaps the deepest themes running through all of these monuments. The burial chambers at Newgrange, Macehoe, and the Maltese temples were all aligned with solar events. The bones of the dead were placed where the light of the turning year would touch them. This is not accidental. It reflects a belief, widespread across the ancient world, that death was not an ending, but a transition, one governed by the same cosmic cycles as the seasons. The sun died each winter and was reborn each spring. The dead, similarly, would return. The monument built to mark the solstice was also the monument built to hold the dead in the light of their promised resurrection. Agriculture deepened the sky's importance in another way. Farming tied people to specific pieces of land and made the seasonal cycle into an economic and existential concern. Mobile hunter-gatherers could respond to environmental variability by moving. Farmers could not. They had to predict what the year would bring and plan their responses in advance. a reliable sky calendar embedded in a permanent stone monument that could be used generation after generation without needing to be recalculated or relearned, was the most powerful planning tool available. It was infrastructure in the deepest sense. There is also the matter of social organization. Building a large monument, whether a stone circle, a burial mound, an alignment of thousands of standing stones, or a great pyramid complex, required the organization of a large workforce over an extended period. It required leadership, planning, resource management, communal decision-making. The monument was not just a product of social organization. It was, in the process of its construction, a creator of social organization. The shared effort, the shared purpose, the shared ceremony of observation and dedication created community bonds and social structures that outlasted the building process itself.
There is also the matter of memory and authority. In a society without writing, the knowledge of when to plant, when to move, when to celebrate, when to mourn, was held in living memory and passed through oral tradition. But oral tradition is fragile. It can be interrupted by plague, by war, by the sudden death of the elder who held the knowledge. A stone monument, aligned to the sky, is a form of writing that does not depend on memory or language. The alignment speaks for itself. The moment the solstice light enters the chamber, the information is conveyed, and anyone present can read it, regardless of what language they speak or whether they know the stories that explain why the monument was built. In this sense, the monuments are books. They are the most durable form of information storage that Neolithic technology could produce. The sky provides the input, the stone provides the output, and the output is the same every year, year after year, for as long as the stones stand and the sky moves. You do not need to know who built Newgrange or why if you are a farmer standing in the Boyne Valley 500 years after its construction. You need only to know that when the light comes in on the morning the farmers call the turning of the year, it is time to begin preparing for the spring. The monument tells you. The monument remembers for you, on behalf of all the people who built it and all the people who will come after. The monument said, "We were here. We worked together. We understood the sky. We have left this knowledge in stone, so that those who come after us will have it too." They were acts of transmission from one generation to the next of the most important knowledge that community possessed. And this, perhaps, is why the pattern repeats itself so consistently across cultures that had no contact with each other. The impulse to mark the sky in stone is not a borrowing, not a diffusion, not the product of a single lost civilization spreading its knowledge across the globe. It is a universal human response to the universal human condition. We are mortal. The sky is not. We live in time. The sky reveals time. We die. The sun returns. We watch, we learn, we build, we leave our record in the only material durable enough to carry it through the centuries: stone. The stars have not moved, not much, not enough. Orion's belt still arcs across the winter sky.
Sirius still blazes in the south as the brightest of all the fixed stars. The Pleiades still cluster together in their small, tight gathering, as they have since long before there were human eyes to see them. The moon still follows its 18-and-a-half-year wobble across the sky, still reaches its major standstill and appears to walk into the stones at Callanish on its great slow cycle. The summer solstice sun still rises above the heel stone at Stonehenge. The winter solstice beam still enters Newgrange every year, without fail, on the morning of the longest night. The stones are still there too, worn smoother now, pitted and lichened, tilted in some cases by centuries of frost and settling ground. Some have fallen, some have been stolen or broken. Some are now buried again, waiting for future excavators. But most of them are still standing, still oriented exactly as their builders intended, still participating in the astronomical alignments that were planned for them thousands of years ago.
Think for a moment about what that means. There are stones standing in the English countryside, in the Irish Boyne Valley, in the Scottish Outer Hebrides, in the Breton countryside of France, in the Maltese Islands, in the Egyptian desert, on the Kenyan lakeshore, and on the Wyoming high plains, that are older than human writing, older than any named civilization, older than the idea of a nation or a city, and they are still doing exactly what they were built to do. They are still marking the sky. They are still pointing to the rising of certain stars, to the solstice sunrise, to the equinox light, to the turning points of the year. The people who built them are gone, every single one of them. The Neolithic farmers of Ireland, the hunter-gatherers of southeastern Turkey, the nomadic cattle herders of Nubia, the mysterious culture of megalithic Malta, the ancestral Puebloans of the American Southwest, the indigenous peoples who built medicine wheels on the high plains, all of them are gone in the sense that they left no names, no texts, no continuous organizational memory. They passed through the world, lived their lives, looked up at the sky, and built these extraordinary things, and then they were gone. But not entirely, not quite, because the stones remain, and the stones remember, and the sky every year, without fail, keeps the appointments the stones were built to mark. The solstice sunrise rises above the heel stone. The winter light enters Newgrange. The equinox sun bisects the altar at Menidra. The dagger of light falls on the spiral at Fajada Butte. The moon walks among the stones of Callanish. These are not metaphors, they are facts, astronomical facts, verified by modern survey and confirmed year after year by the sky itself. The builders of these monuments created astronomical instruments of such precision and durability that they are still functioning thousands of years after their makers died. That is an engineering achievement so profound that even in this age of atomic clocks, radio telescopes, and satellite positioning, it deserves our deepest respect. But beyond the engineering, beyond the astronomy, beyond the cultural anthropology and the archaeoastronomy, and all the learned debate about what these sites meant and how they were built, and whether this alignment is precise or that one merely coincidental, there is something simpler and more important. These people were like us. They looked at the sky and felt wonder. They felt, as we feel, the strange vertigo of realizing that the universe is enormous and they are small,
that time is vast and a human life is brief, that there is something out there, something regular and reliable and beautiful and beyond their control, that follows its courses without any reference to their fears or desires. And they responded to that feeling as we respond to it, with the desire to understand, with the desire to mark, with the desire to say, I was here, I noticed this, I measured this, I will leave a record. They built their record in stone because stone lasts. They oriented it toward the sky because the sky is the most reliable thing there is. They made it beautiful because beauty is how humans express reverence. And they gathered at these places at the turning points of the year, because those turning points, the solstice, the equinox, the heliacal rising of the bright stars, were moments when the universe made itself most clearly visible, most clearly knowable, most clearly a thing that could be shared between the infinite and the mortal. Consider for a moment what the night sky looked like to these people. They had no electric light, no ambient glow from cities or roads. On a moonless night, they lived in darkness that most of us have never experienced. A true, complete, enveloping darkness in which the sky above was the only source of light. Under those conditions, the stars are not a background decoration. They are overwhelming. The Milky Way, which most people living in modern cities have never seen properly, arches across the sky like a road, dense with stars, its structure visible to the naked eye in all its depth and complexity. Individual planets move against the fixed stars in patterns that reward attention. Meteors streak and blaze. The moon transforms the night landscape completely, flooding fields and hillsides with silver light that cast shadows as sharp as midday. Living under that sky, attentive to it in the way that survival required, you would know it the way you know a beloved place. You would know the seasonal shifts in the constellations, the way Orion appears in the winter evenings and is gone by late spring, the way the Pleiades signal the coming of autumn, the way the bright arc of Scorpius rises in the southern summer sky and sets again before winter comes. You would know the planets by their slightly steadier, slightly warmer light, by the way they do not twinkle quite the way stars do, by the slow wander of their paths against the fixed backdrop. You would know the moon in all its phases, a reliable clock and calendar all by itself. And you would notice, with the kind of long-term pattern recognition that comes from a lifetime of attentive observation passed down through generations of equally attentive observers, that certain stars rose at certain points in the year with remarkable consistency, that the sun rose at its northernmost point on the same morning every year, the morning when the shadows were shortest and the day was longest, that on 2 specific mornings each year, morning perfectly balanced between the darkness and the light, equal night and day fell across the whole world at once. These observations are not difficult, given sufficient attention and time. They do not require instruments. They do not require mathematics in the formal sense. They require only the qualities that the builders of these monuments clearly possessed in abundance: patience, attention, continuity, the willingness to watch and record and pass the knowledge forward, year after year, generation after generation, until the pattern was fully understood. And then, armed with that understanding, they built. They built with an ambition that staggers the imagination. Not because the engineering was impossible, because it clearly was not. accomplished as it was across every inhabited continent by cultures at various stages of technological development, but because the scale of the commitment is so enormous. Moving multi-ton stones across miles of landscape, orienting structures to celestial events with sub-degree precision, sustaining the collective effort across generations, trusting that the alignment you are building today will still be meaningful to the people who will stand here in 100 years, in 500 years, in 1,000 years. That trust was not misplaced. We are still here. We are still standing at Stonehenge on midsummer morning. We are still queuing for the lottery that might let us stand inside Newgrange at dawn on the winter solstice. We are still walking the Carnac rows at dusk, running our hands along the rough granite, looking along the lines toward the horizon. We are still climbing for Harder Butte to see the dagger of light find the spiral. They built for us, in a sense. They built for anyone who would come and look and wonder. And we are here, and we look, and we wonder.
We have been doing this for 12,000 years at least. We have been looking up and building and measuring and wondering for as long as we have been fully human. The first astronomer was not a scientist in a university. The first astronomer was a person who sat in the dark before dawn, watching the eastern horizon, and noticed that the same star appeared at the same point in the year, year after year, and thought, I should remember this, I should mark this, I should make sure the people who come after me know about this too. All of these monuments, from Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge to Newgrange to Nabta Playa to the Bighorn Medicine Wheel to the Sun Dagger at Fahada Butte, are expressions of that same impulse, the oldest and most persistent human impulse we have, the desire to understand our place in the universe, the desire to connect the world we live in to the sky above us, the desire, perhaps most of all, to leave something that will last. They left their stones, the stars kept their appointments, and here we are, thousands of years later, still looking up. Let the darkness settle around you now. Let the weight of all those years, all those skies, all those patient watching eyes, be something that holds you gently rather than presses down. You are part of this too. Every time you look up on a clear night and feel that particular hush, that specific awe, you are part of the same unbroken human line that built Stonehenge and Newgrange and Göbekli Tepe. Every time you notice the seasons changing, the days growing shorter or longer, the stars shifting in their positions against the late-night sky, you are doing what people have always done, what people were built to do. The stones have been standing in their fields for a very long time. They will stand there long after all of us are gone. And the sky will keep its appointments, year after year, century after century. The solstice light finding its mark, the stars rising in their seasons, the moon completing its long cycles and returning to its standstill, entering the circle again. Let yourself drift now. Let the stones stand quiet in their fields. Let the stars move in their slow courses above the dark world.
Let the winter solstice beam travel down through the darkness toward the back of the ancient chamber. 19 meters of darkness, and then light. Light that has traveled 93 million miles to arrive at exactly this moment, in exactly this place, as it has every year for 5,000 years without fail. Let the moon walk among the tall, thin stones of Callanish, silver and enormous above the Hebridean hills, walking the path it has always walked, keeping the appointment it will always keep.
Let the Nazca hummingbird draw its invisible line to the winter solstice horizon on the Peruvian plain, under a darkness full of stars. Let Sirius rise in the deep Egyptian night, heralding the flood, as it did before the pharaohs and will do long after we are dust. Let all of it happen, as it is always happening, as it never stops happening, as it will happen again tomorrow morning and the morning after that. You are here. You are warm. You are safe. The sky is doing what it has always done. The stones remember everything. And somewhere in the long quiet of 5,000 years of winter solstice mornings, the light is still finding its way in. Sleep well. If this journey through ancient skies and forgotten stones helped carry you toward sleep tonight, it would mean everything to me if you would like this video, subscribe to Heyo Boring History for Sleep, and leave a comment letting me know where in the world you are listening from. I am working towards 1,000 subscribers, and every single person who joins this little corner of slow, soothing history brings me one step closer to that goal. Sweet dreams, wherever you are drifting tonight.